Hey there, and welcome to the Book Lounge, your go-to space where powerful ideas come to life through books that shape how we see the world. Today's feature isn't just timely, it's essential. We're stepping into Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order: Why Nations Succeed and Fail by Ray Dalio. If you've ever wondered why some empires rise while others crumble, why your economy feels more uncertain than ever, or what history can teach us about what comes next, this video will be one of the most important listens you'll hear this year. Ray Dalio isn't just a best-selling author. He's the founder of Bridgewater Associates, one of the largest and most influential investment firms in the world. He's spent decades analyzing global markets, historic patterns, and political shifts. In this book, he takes you through a gripping, research-backed journey that breaks down how the same cycles of prosperity and collapse have repeated for centuries, and what that means for our world today. With rising global tensions, inflation, debt crises, and power shifts between East and West, Dalio's insights couldn't be more relevant. This isn't just theory, it's a practical lens to help you understand what's happening around you, how it connects to the past, and what it could mean for the future of your country, your job, and your finances. So settle in, because by the end of this video, you won't just understand the world a little better. You'll see it with new eyes. Welcome to the Book Lounge. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Big Cycle in a Tiny Nutshell. History doesn't move in straight lines. It moves in cycles. Chapter 1 distills centuries of empires rising and collapsing into a single, sweeping arc that reveals a stunning pattern. Nations and economies all follow a predictable life cycle. Like a pulse, they surge with innovation, strength, and wealth, then falter under the weight of debt, conflict, and internal division. This chapter introduces the concept of the big cycle, a rhythm that has repeated itself for over 500 years. From the Dutch and British empires to the American superpower and the rise of China today, the signs are eerily familiar. Strength leads to success, success leads to excess, and excess leads to vulnerability. The cycle unfolds in three major phases: the rise, marked by strong leadership, education, competitiveness, and unity; the top, where financial markets boom, wealth gaps widen, and complacency sets in; and finally, the decline, when debt balloons, conflicts emerge, and societies fracture from within. This isn't abstract theory. It's a map, a lens to understand where we are in today's world and what could be coming next. If you've ever felt like the world is spinning faster and the news more chaotic, this chapter gives that chaos context. It shows how the past is whispering clues about the future, and how history, if we're willing to see it, might just be repeating itself with uncanny precision. Chapter 2. The Determinants. What separates a flourishing empire from one that crumbles into irrelevance? Chapter 2 unpacks the core forces that determine whether a nation rises, sustains its power, or slips into decline, and it does so with razor-sharp clarity. Here, the world is laid out like a grand chessboard, where power is earned, lost, and reshuffled based on a set of fundamental drivers. The chapter identifies 8 key strengths that shape a nation's trajectory, ranging from strong education systems and innovation to competitiveness in global trade, military power, and financial resilience. These strengths build on each other like dominoes. When one falls, the rest soon follow. At the heart of it all is productivity. Not raw resources or luck, but a nation's ability to create value through knowledge, creativity, and disciplined systems. That's the engine behind sustained growth. But power doesn't last on autopilot. Without wise leadership and a culture of adaptability, decline creeps in through rising debt, widening inequality, and internal conflict. This chapter doesn't just explain what drives nations. It shows why current global tensions, economic shifts, and cultural clashes aren't random. They're symptoms of deeper forces in motion, forces that have played out again and again throughout history. If you want to understand how today's leading nations may rise further or fall faster, this chapter holds the blueprint. The signs are all there. The only question is, who's reading them? Chapter 3. The Big Cycle of Money, Credit, Debt, and Economic Activity. Chapter 3 pulls back the curtain on the silent engine that drives every economy, the intricate dance between money, credit, debt, and productivity. This isn't a dry finance lesson. It's the pulse of nations, the reason behind booms, busts, and everything in between. At its core, this chapter reveals how credit fuels expansion. When people and governments borrow, they spend more than they earn, creating a surge of activity. Businesses grow, jobs multiply, wealth appears to flourish. But debt doesn't disappear. It accumulates like pressure in a system, waiting for a release. Eventually, the borrowing reaches a tipping point. Debts become unpayable, trust wavers, and the cycle shifts. What once looked like prosperity begins to unravel. Defaults rise. Central banks step in. Currencies weaken. Inflation or deflation hits, depending on how the crisis is handled. This is the rhythm of economies, short-term cycles layered over long-term ones. And when the long-term debt cycle matures, the consequences are historic. Think the Great Depression, the 2008 financial crisis, or what's stirring globally today. Chapter 3 doesn't just explain how money works. It maps the hidden forces shaping your cost of living, your job prospects, and the stability of nations. It reveals how the invisible levers of monetary policy and credit expansion can build empires or break them. This knowledge isn't just powerful, it's essential, because the next chapter of global history may already be written in debt. Chapter 4: The Changing Value of Money. Chapter 4 unlocks one of the most misunderstood forces shaping our world: the erosion and transformation of money's value over time. On the surface, a dollar is a dollar, but in reality, its power, its meaning, and its influence shift dramatically depending on the choices nations make and the pressures they face. This chapter traces how governments and central banks manage money and how their decisions, especially during times of war, crisis, or economic strain, can quietly devalue what people hold in their hands. Inflation, devaluation, and currency debasement aren't rare mistakes. They're recurring tools in a nation's survival kit. We're shown how history is filled with once dominant currencies that eventually lost their status, like the Dutch guilder or the British pound. Their decline wasn't sudden. It happened gradually, as trust eroded and debts mounted. Behind each fading currency was a fading empire, struggling to reconcile growing obligations with dwindling productivity. As money loses its value, the effects ripple outward. Purchasing power drops, inequality widens, and unrest grows. People instinctively seek safety in hard assets, foreign currencies, or systems they believe can't be manipulated. Chapter 4 doesn't just tell you how money changes, it shows how that change reshapes the world. Every financial decision, every policy move, and every geopolitical shift is influenced by this underlying current. When the value of money becomes uncertain, everything else becomes unstable. And in that instability, history often takes a dramatic turn. Chapter 5: The Big Cycle of Internal Order and Disorder. Chapter 5 takes us into the heart of a nation, not its borders, but its soul. This is where empires either strengthen from within or begin to unravel. The cycle of internal order and disorder is a pattern as old as civilization itself, and its signs are strikingly familiar. It begins with unity, a shared vision, strong institutions, and respect for the rules of the game. During this phase, countries thrive, people work together, productivity grows, and the system feels fair, or at least functional. But as wealth accumulates, cracks begin to show. Gaps widen between rich and poor, educated and left behind, powerful and powerless. Resentment brews in the shadows. Trust in leadership falters. Political polarization spreads like wildfire. The center weakens, and extremes start pulling harder at both ends. Protests, populism, and social unrest don't appear out of nowhere. They're symptoms of a deeper imbalance that's been building for years. This chapter connects economic forces with social consequences. When inequality reaches critical mass and the cost of living collides with fading opportunity, people demand change, sometimes peacefully, sometimes violently. History tells us that internal conflict often emerges not when times are hardest, but when expectations shatter. What we're seeing in today's world, division, outrage, tribalism, isn't unprecedented. It's part of a cycle. And understanding that cycle may be the only way to prevent it from tearing societies apart. Order is fragile. Once broken, rebuilding it demands far more than policy. It requires collective will. Chapter 6: The Big Cycle of External Order and Disorder. Chapter 6 shifts the lens outward, zooming in on how nations clash, cooperate, and compete on the global stage. When the internal structure of a country is stable, its leaders can focus beyond their borders. But when the balance of power starts shifting among nations, the world enters a new and dangerous phase: external disorder. This chapter lays out the anatomy of global conflict. Rising powers challenge the status quo. Declining powers grow anxious and defensive. Trade tensions flare. Military posturing increases. Alliances are tested, and diplomacy gives way to confrontation. The global order, once held together by trust and shared interests, begins to fray. History's most turbulent moments, world wars, cold wars, and economic decoupling, often emerge at this stage of the cycle. It's not sudden. It builds slowly as mistrust, competition, and zero-sum thinking seep into every international move. The existing superpower resists decline. The challenger demands more influence. And caught in between are the rest of the world's nations, navigating a minefield of shifting loyalties and rising uncertainty. In the current climate, echoes of this cycle are loud, escalating tensions between East and West, battles over tech dominance, currency struggles, and competing visions for the future of global leadership. This chapter reminds us, peace is maintained not just by goodwill, but by balance. When that balance tips, disorder fills the vacuum. Understanding these external dynamics isn't just about watching the news, it's about recognizing the early tremors of potential global transformation. Chapter 7, Investing in Light of the Big Cycle. Chapter 7 delivers a rare kind of clarity, the kind that cuts through market noise and reveals the deeper forces shaping wealth across generations. It's not just a chapter for investors. It's a blueprint for survival when the ground beneath the global economy begins to shift. Here, the focus turns to decision-making in uncertain times. When debt levels are surging, currencies wobble, and geopolitical tensions rise, traditional investment playbooks start to fail. This chapter reveals how understanding the big cycle isn't just useful, it's crucial for protecting and growing capital. History shows that during major transitions, when empires fall, monetary systems reset, and world orders change, most people lose. They cling to what worked in the past. The few who understand the larger patterns, they adapt early, shift wisely, and often come out stronger. The chapter encourages looking beyond borders. Diversify not just across asset classes, but across countries, currencies, and systems. Watch the movement of capital. Follow the shifts in power. Gold, commodities, inflation-linked assets, emerging markets. Each plays a different role when traditional safe havens start to wobble. It challenges the illusion of permanence. What seems stable today may not survive tomorrow's cycle. By studying how wealth has been preserved and destroyed through history's biggest economic turning points, we gain a sharper lens for what lies ahead. In times of great change, the greatest risk is standing still. This chapter shows how to move forward, calculated, aware, and prepared. Chapter 8, The Last 500 Years in a Tiny Nutshell. Chapter 8 reads like a time machine compressed into a single, breathtaking sweep through history. Over the last 5 centuries, the world has seen empires rise, dominate, and vanish, each following a rhythm that's both haunting and instructive. The story begins with the Dutch, whose mastery of trade and innovation sparked the birth of modern capitalism. Their dominance, though brief, paved the way for the British Empire, an era powered by industrial might, global colonization, and the pound sterling at the center of global finance. Then came the American chapter, fueled by technological innovation, military strength, and the ascendancy of the US dollar. But just as the empires before it, signs of strain began to emerge: soaring debt, internal division, and external challenges from rising powers, particularly China. This chapter doesn't just recount milestones, it stitches them into a coherent cycle. In each case, the ingredients were the same: strong leadership, global competitiveness, reserve currency status, followed by excess, inequality, and conflict. The patterns are unmistakable, and they whisper something urgent about where we are today. What makes this chapter especially powerful is the realization that we're not watching isolated events, we're witnessing echoes. The turbulence in today's headlines is part of a much larger historical arc. To see the future more clearly, this chapter urges us to look backward with sharper eyes. Because understanding the last 500 years isn't a history lesson, it's a strategic advantage. Chapter 9, The Big Cycle: Rise and Decline of the Dutch Empire and the Guilder. Chapter 9 brings the rise and fall of the Dutch Empire into sharp focus, a powerful lesson in how even the most seemingly invincible nations can be brought to their knees by the same forces that elevated them to greatness. The Dutch, once the unrivaled economic power of the 17th century, offer a textbook example of the big cycle at work. In their heyday, the Dutch dominated global trade, establishing the world's first multinational corporation, the Dutch East India Company, and creating an empire built on sea power and innovation. The guilder, their currency, became the backbone of global commerce, trusted and revered as a stable store of value. But as prosperity grew, so did excess. What followed was a gradual, yet undeniable decline. Overexpansion, mounting debt, and a failure to adapt to new realities led to internal instability. The Dutch found themselves unable to keep up with rising competitors, particularly Britain, and the very institutions that once empowered them now weighed them down. The guilder, once the world's most trusted currency, eventually lost its dominance. This chapter pulls no punches. It shows how even the most advanced and wealthy societies can slip into decline when the underlying forces of internal imbalance, external competition, and poor decision-making converge. It's a story of hubris, missed opportunities, and the cyclical nature of history. In the end, the Dutch Empire's story is both a cautionary tale and a blueprint for understanding the dynamics that shape every great power, an invaluable guide for anyone trying to make sense of today's shifting global order. Chapter 10: The Big Cycle: Rise and Decline of the British Empire and the Pound. Chapter 10 takes us through the turbulent yet awe-inspiring journey of the British Empire, once the dominant global superpower, and the rise and fall of the British pound as the world's reserve currency. The British Empire, at its zenith, was the centerpiece of world trade, naval dominance, and colonial power. The pound, backed by its empire, was seen as a symbol of stability and wealth. In the early 19th century, Britain led the world through the Industrial Revolution, becoming a hub of innovation and economic growth. The strength of its institutions, its unparalleled navy, and the global reach of the British pound made it the cornerstone of the global financial system. For nearly a century, the pound held the world's trust, making it the reserve currency used in international trade and investment. However, like all empires, Britain's dominance was not meant to last forever. The massive costs of war, especially the two world wars, drained its resources and undermined its power. Debt soared, and Britain's economic foundations began to crack. In the wake of these challenges, the rise of the U.S. and the shift of global power dynamics signaled the decline of the pound. By the mid-20th century, Britain could no longer maintain its global position, and the dollar supplanted the pound as the new global reserve currency. The British Empire, once unchallenged, slipped into a period of decline. The British pound, once synonymous with global stability, no longer held the same weight it once did. This chapter serves as a stark reminder of the cyclical nature of global power. The rise of great nations is always followed by a period of decay, often catalyzed by overreach, debt, and the inability to adapt to a changing world. The fall of the British Empire is a sobering lesson for today's global powers. Chapter 11: The Big Cycle: Rise and Decline of the United States and the Dollar. Chapter 11 immerses us in the powerful ascent and gradual transformation of the United States, tracing the rise of the U.S. as a global superpower and the dollar's journey to becoming the world's reserve currency. The story begins with the United States emerging from World War II as the dominant economic and military force, holding unparalleled influence on the global stage. The U.S. dollar, tied to gold under the Bretton Woods system, became the backbone of international trade, and its strength symbolized America's dominance in world affairs. But as time passed, the internal contradictions that all great powers face began to surface. The cost of maintaining global military commitments, skyrocketing debt, and domestic inequality began to chip away at the United States' stability. While the dollar remained the world's primary currency, the foundations supporting its value started to weaken. The U.S. response, especially after abandoning the gold standard in the 1970s, allowed the dollar to float freely. But this decision introduced new vulnerabilities, chiefly an increasing reliance on debt and the printing of money. As global debt surged, so did America's reliance on the dollar's continued dominance. However, as global dynamics shift, the dollar faces growing competition from emerging powers, particularly China, which has begun positioning its currency as a challenger to U.S. supremacy. This chapter lays bare the reality. No empire is eternal, and no currency is immune to the changing tides of economic and geopolitical forces. The cycle of rise and decline plays out once again, reminding us that even the most dominant nations must adapt to avoid the inevitable fall. Chapter 12, The Big Cycle, Rise of China and the Renminbi. Chapter 12 shifts our focus to a rising power, the spectacular ascent of China. Once a nation crippled by poverty and political turmoil, China's transformation over the past few decades is nothing short of extraordinary. Through disciplined economic strategies, a booming manufacturing sector, and unparalleled growth, China has evolved into a global economic powerhouse. Today, it is the second largest economy in the world, and its influence extends far beyond its borders. The chapter paints a vivid picture of China's strategic rise, emphasizing its calculated approach to modernization and the ambitious goals set by its leadership. From infrastructure development to technological innovation, China's ascent is the result of a careful balance of state-led capitalism, economic pragmatism, and a vision of long-term global dominance. The country's ever-expanding role in global trade and investment has made the renminbi, its currency, a critical player on the world stage. But as China rises, it also faces significant challenges. While the renminbi has grown in importance, it has yet to match the US dollar's dominance as the global reserve currency. The chapter highlights how China's economic expansion, though impressive, is still under pressure from internal disparities, an aging population, and geopolitical tensions, particularly with the United States. This chapter reveals an unfolding drama, one where China is not only claiming its seat at the table, but also preparing to rewrite the rules of global finance. As the world watches, the rise of China and the renminbi signals the dawn of a new era in the big cycle of global power. Chapter 13, The Big Cycle, The Challenges and Opportunities of the Changing World Order. Chapter 13 zooms in on the challenges and opportunities that come with a shifting world order, a moment when established powers face new contenders and the entire global landscape is in flux. The chapter provides an in-depth look at the pivotal forces shaping this new era, where we are witnessing the rise of new superpowers, like China, and the potential decline of traditional hegemonic powers, like the United States. As the balance of power tilts, we see the intense competition for dominance in multiple domains: economic, political, military, and technological. The chapter underscores the significance of understanding the big cycle and how history tends to repeat itself. Nations that fail to recognize these cycles often find themselves on the wrong side of change, experiencing rapid decline or losing their place in the global pecking order. However, this chapter also highlights opportunities for countries, businesses, and individuals. As the global dynamics shift, there is room for strategic adaptation and growth. Nations that can learn from the past and adjust to the changing environment stand the best chance of thriving. It's a time for innovation, collaboration, and new strategies to navigate the turbulence ahead. Key to the chapter's message is the reminder that these cycles are not inevitable. Countries have the agency to influence their fate. With the right leadership and a clear understanding of global trends, the inevitable decline doesn't have to be a foregone conclusion. Instead, it can be an invitation for reinvention and resilience. This chapter serves as both a warning and a guide. The world is changing fast, and those who understand the forces at play will be better positioned to navigate the tumultuous waters ahead. Chapter 14, The Future. In the final chapter, the focus shifts to the future, exploring the potential paths the world could take as it faces an unprecedented era of change. This chapter is not only a culmination of the big cycles discussed throughout the book, but it also provides an urgent call to action for individuals, nations, and global leaders alike. The central idea here is that we are at a crossroads in history, and the decisions made today will define the global order for generations to come. At the heart of this change is the fundamental shift in power. The U.S. has been the dominant global force for much of the past century. But as the global balance shifts, especially with the rise of China and other emerging economies, the current world order faces serious challenges. The future, according to this chapter, hinges on how the U.S. and other nations adapt to these evolving dynamics. The chapter delves into the profound implications of these shifts, not just in economic terms, but politically and socially as well. As new powers rise, the rules of engagement between nations will inevitably change. There will be intense competition for resources, influence, and innovation, but also immense opportunities for those who position themselves wisely. The future of money, global trade, and economic cooperation will not look like the past, and those who fail to anticipate these changes risk falling behind. However, this chapter also holds a message of hope and possibility. The global challenges we face today, from climate change to technological advancements, also present us with the chance to redefine how we live, interact, and cooperate. The choices made in this time of transition will be crucial in shaping the future of humanity. What makes this final chapter so compelling is its insistence that we are not passive bystanders in this global transformation. Nations, leaders, and individuals can still make choices that influence the outcome. The world will change, but how it changes depends on what actions are taken now. Ultimately, this last chapter urges us to reflect on the lessons of history while remaining open to innovation and adaptation. The future is not predetermined, and with clear vision and bold decisions, it can be shaped into something that fosters collaboration, prosperity, and a more balanced global order. As this chapter closes, we are left with the powerful realization that the future is ours to create. And that brings us to the end of this powerful journey through principles for dealing with the changing world order. If something struck a chord, an idea, a revelation, or just a moment that made you think, drop it in the comments. Your thoughts might just spark a conversation that leads to deeper insight for others too. If you're hungry for more, check out the curated playlists right here on the Book Lounge. Whether you're seeking sharp insights on wealth building, a dose of daily motivation, or guidance on business and entrepreneurship, you'll find a structured path to elevate your thinking and sharpen your edge. Remember, these audiobook summaries condense lengthy books with hundreds over pages into rich, thought-provoking experiences you can absorb in a fraction of the time. It's a smarter, faster way to soak in the wisdom of great minds, without needing to carve out entire days to flip through chapters. And of course, if you found value here, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. It's the simplest way to support the channel, and make sure you never miss your next breakthrough. Thanks for listening, and I'll meet you again in the next book.